But as Cody will talk about, he's going to talk about a lot of things that work in your environment, or he'll share from his perspective, and you can think about what works for you. So, Cody?
Well, thank you for those comments. I don't know that I live up to all that, but I appreciate it anyway. On Tuesday, I wasn't able to be at the conference early enough to hear Jim's talk, so I heard it for the first time this morning. And had I heard it on Tuesday, I would have changed the title of my slide from breeding a functional cow that works in your environment to talent selection for a profitable farm. So, Jim, I think that's one thing that needs to be added to your list of what a manager's role is talent selection and talent procurement. And what I'm talking about is the cow, right? That's the employee on the farm. So we're going to talk a lot about how I've went about talent selection. And I'll tell you, first of all, a little bit about myself and my family. So this is me and my family. So Angela, my wife, we were high school sweethearts and got married while we were in college. And now we've got two wonderful children. We have our own farm as well. We've got 65 acres where we raise beef cattle, goats, sheep, chickens. We had a short stint with pastured pigs. That is not for me. I could not find a place where they benefited the forages. I'm sure for other contexts that works, but not for me. So that's my recreational farming career. I also have a professional farming career where I'm the farm manager at the Loretto Mother House Farm. This farm has been in continuous operation since 1789, and the Sisters of Loretto, the current owners, have been owners of that property since 1824. So we're over 200 years in single ownership. And I can trace the farm managers back about 100 years. Prior to that, we're not really sure if there was an individual in charge or if it was just kind of collectively as the sisters, as they kind of managed it, or if it was religious men or how it was managed then. But currently, it's myself, and I've got two part-time helpers that help me on the farm. We've got about 300 acres of woodlands that we manage pretty intensively. We're not doing major timber harvest or anything. We kind of collect damaged trees, and we utilize some of those trees, saw the lumber and stuff for our own uses, but we're not doing any kind of serious timber harvest. We're trying to manage a natural forest, sort of like a Bernheim forest or somewhere like that, where we have sort of a reference, just a place for wildlife. Managing for wildlife also is typically managing for high-quality timber as well. So we're not precluding the idea of doing a timber harvest, just not in our goals right now. We also have a grain crop operation, corn, soybeans, the gamut. We do 100% cover crops, and we grow pumpkins. So I'm glad to be rounding out the end of the pumpkin season. That is a very, very busy time of the year. We grew 6 acres this year. One of the interesting things we do with our pumpkins is we do pop-up pumpkin patches. So we contract with schools and businesses, and we load the pumpkins up. We take them to their facility, and we unload them in their yard. And some of the local principals refer to us as the pumpkin fairies because we show up and poof, there's a pumpkin patch in their yard. We've also got the pasture, the hay, and the beef cattle. We're going to talk more in detail about that. We also have a lot of conservation plantings, wildflowers, native grasses, those sort of things, lakes, ponds, the rest of the buildings. So on the property, there's more than just a farm. There's also the original convent, where the kind of the dormitory for the sisters as they were in formation to become vowed women religious. We also have a nursing home. So it's called the Mother House because that's where they started and that's where they finish. So we also have the nursing home on property. There's administration building, archives for the 200 plus years of history of the Sisters of Loretto, some residences and retreat centers, and actually 2 cemeteries. One typical cemetery like you would see with gravestones, and we've got one that's in the woods. It's a natural burial cemetery, so that's kind of a neat thing that we have going on there as well. So talking about how our employees are managed, I'm going to start thinking about them, trying to think about them in that way. How our employees are managed and the working conditions that we put them in. We practice rotational grazing. I've some familiar faces in here that have been to the farm, maybe seen me talk on some other things as well. Rotational grazing, strip grazing, cover crops, stockpile fescue. All the things that you've been hearing about. Managing your grazing system. We're doing a lot of those things. We're not moving cattle every day. I have done that. I'm not moving cattle. There's times where they stay in the same place for maybe a month or more. I do put cattle in a confinement feedlot sometimes. I do feed hay. But I've got several different classes of livestock, and I manage them in different ways based upon, as a manager, my labor availability. In October, it's challenging for me to deal much with the cattle when I've got grain harvest to do, and I've got pumpkins to harvest, and I've got pumpkins to deliver. So October's a challenging month for me to be able to do much with my cattle. So they've kind of been forgotten about, and they've kind of had to make it on their own, which they should be doing anyway. But they're kind of doing their own thing right now. The cow-calf operation is kind of the primary focus of more than half of the farm, and you'll hear me come back to this multiple times talking about flexibility. So we've been very flexible in our marketing options. I don't believe in dogmas. I don't believe in putting yourself in a strict box of saying, well, I am organic, or I am regenerative, or I am no grain or no hay or whatever. I think it's important to have all the tools available to you at any given time so you can respond to the current climate, the current market, the current whatever, the current crisis that you're having to deal with in your own operation. And so we've taken cattle to stockyards. We've done freezer beef. We've sold bred heifers. We've sold open heifers for breeding. We've sold the feeder calves that have been grass raised. We've sold them to other producers who were taking them to slaughter to meet their market demands. So we've done about every kind of marketing opportunity you can think of, other than we haven't done any kind of retained ownership in feedlots or like a herd share kind of thing, where somebody owns a cow and you pay you basically to run it on your farm. We haven't done anything like that. But I bring those up because I'm flexible. I'm open to those ideas. In the early years, we primarily were doing freezer beef, and we've kind of transitioned recently to doing more on the stockyards marketing. We've kind of, we'll talk more about how the herd has grown over the time, but I've gotten the herd to a pretty good size now where I am able to put together some sizable groups to be able to take and market. In our early years where I was trying to grow the herd, I was basically retaining all of my heifers and giving them one chance of breeding and then selecting from that. And so I've now gotten the herd to the size where I've got heifers I can sell, steers I can sell, and we're exceeded what we're able to sell with the freezer beef marketing. So we're still doing some freezer beef, but frankly in this current cattle market, it's challenging to get people to pay what they're worth at the stockyards when you include the processing cost. It cost me almost $700 to process one animal. You get 350 pounds of meat back from one animal, so you got $2 a pound right off the bat just in processing costs, and that's if I gave the animal away. So you can do the math. $10, $12 hamburger is not too appetizing to most people in my area, in the rural part of the state, where we're not near a huge metropolitan center with lots of extra cash laying around. So the stockyard market has been very lucrative for us in this time. Really have focused a lot on limited inputs and limited supplemental feed. We try to produce everything on the farm, and again, those cows need to be working, need to be doing what cows were made to do. And I don't want to have to work for the cows. I want them to work for me. So I mentioned all the different ways that we're managing them. Summer annuals, native grasses. We put up haylage. We put up hay. I buy some hay. I sell some hay and turn around and buy hay back. If I can sell it for a higher price and buy cheaper hay back in, and I've got about the same nutrients, to me, that's profitability. And again, important to remain flexible and adaptable. So, yeah, we've got cows out grazing corn stalks. Not this week, but we did last week, grazing on some corn stalks. We've got cattle grazing summer annuals through the summer, grazing stockpile fescue in the fall. So there was a little bit of a discussion earlier. So one of the practices that I do is I have a spring and fall calving herd, and my fall calving cows, they come to a barn in September. I feed them hay in that barn September and October till we're done calving. This year we got done calving middle of October, so they just went out of the barn. And so during that time, I've still got my spring cows out grazing, but that has reduced the number of animal units I've got out on those pastures. So I'm kind of allowing my my forages to get ahead and grow, do some stockpile growth, and then November, December, January, I don't usually feed a whole lot of hay during that time of year. I will kind of do a modified stockpiled feeding with bale grazing along with it. So unrolling some hay, different things. Again, just working with whatever the context is of that particular year. So I'll back up to where we started. So I've been at the mother house. I started in the fall of 2015. And when I came there were 11 basically commercial Angus cows. I didn't have any kind of documentation or history. I didn't know what they were. You might as well just went to the stockyards and bought them. May have been what they did. I really don't know. But when I came there, 11 cows. I think there were 6 or 7 calves at the time. I can't remember, but they were of all ages. And there was one uncut breeding steer. Has anybody ever seen one of those? We had an uncut breeding steer. And he had sired, I guess, those calves that were there and all the calves that the cows were bred with. And some records that was passed down to me. There was a lapse of management between me and the fellow that was before me, and he was only there for about a year, and there was a lapse in time between that manager and the one before him. So they'd had some struggles finding somebody to manage the operation. And in the meantime, they had sold a bunch of cattle down, and I don't know if they bought these back or if these are just ones that they held on to or what the situation was, but I was told that they were young cows. Oh, these are good cows. They're young. They're going to be a good seed stock for you. Well, I was 21 years old and didn't want to put my neck out on the line too strong. So I had a veterinarian come in and agree with me that these cows were not as young as what everybody thought they were. There were some of them 10, 12 years old already. Some of them we didn't know how old they were because there wasn't any teeth to mouth them by. So we sold the bull, or that uncut breeding steer, sold the open cows, and that left me with 6 what I'm calling my foundation cows. And as a matter of fact, one of those is still on the farm, and we aged her at about 6 or 7 years old at that point. I would assume she had produced a couple of calves. She had a calf on her, and she was bred back whenever I started, and she has given me 10 bull calves, 10 springs in a row. So she's doing her job, right? I mean, that's what she's supposed to do. She's really meeting the minimum requirement. I mean, a lot of people look at it and think that's exceptional, but that's kind of the minimum requirement, right? She's not producing a calf, then she's not even meeting the minimum requirement, so she's got to go. I paired the cows with the calves, separated them, paired them back up one at a time, figure out which calf belonged to which cow, all that kind of stuff. That gave me the opportunity to start my record keeping, so I could know, all right, this cow had a calf this year, this is, when it weaned, and some of that kind of information. And then we purchased a polled Hereford bull. That allowed me to implement my breeding seasons, and I started crossbreeding. So this is a neighbor's dog that showed up to help me move cattle one day. Pretty worthless, didn't help a whole lot. So I called the neighbor and told him it was there. I evaluated whether it was going to be a good fit before I did, but so it went back home. But you'll see I got cattle of all different colors. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that. Successes and challenges. Heterosis is the most important tool as a commercial cattle producer. If you're seed stock or you're a stocker person, some of these things are not going to apply to you, obviously. But for me, as a cow-calf producer who is producing commercial calves, heterosis is the most important thing that I have as a tool to my farm, and it is free. It doesn't cost you 1 penny. You don't have to go out and buy it. You don't have to haul it. It's just a management shift. All right. So if you're not familiar with heterosis, or hybrid vigor, basically what it amounts to is when you take one breed and you crossbreed it with another breed, that offspring is going to produce. It's going to perform at a superior level to the parents. All right. It's a genetic phenomenon where the offspring it produces the best qualities of both of the input breeds. So, for example, you take an Angus cow and you breed it to a Charolais bull, the offspring will outperform both the Charolais and the Angus. All right, so you'll have good growth traits from the Charolais, the big meaty frame. You'll have good mothering and longevity or whatever from the Angus, or whatever the breed. You pick two breeds, you pair them together, you're going to get some of the preferred traits out of both of those breeds for a superior offspring. To get 100% heterosis, the most heterosis you can possibly get, it basically takes three breeds. You do what you call an F1 cow, which would be that Angus crossed with a Charolais or whatever, pick two breeds. That offspring is an F1, all right? So one of my preferred F1s for a long time has been a black baldy. So you take an Angus crossed with a Hereford, that gives you an F1 black baldy, black white face cow. Breed that cow back to another breed, Shorthorn, Simmental, Limousin. Again, you pick the breed, and that offspring is going to have 100% heterosis that's available by doing those breeding selections. So you have improved cow longevity, you have improved fertility, you have improved mothering in that F1 cow that you've built, and then when you breed it back to another breed, that calf is going to have improved health, improved growth, all those different beneficial traits. Again, totally free, just requires you to select a bull, all right, and your bull selections and your cow selections. Has anybody ever been told you don't want to keep heifers out of a heifer? I've heard, when I was growing up, that's what I was told. Oh, you don't keep a heifer out of a heifer. Nobody ever had a reason for it. Well, I think completely opposite of that. I think heifers are where you should keep your heifers from. And my reasoning is that if you're trying to build your genetics and improve your genetics on your herd, that heifer that just calved is your newest, most up-to-date genetics, right? Because she was sired by whatever bull you just selected. She's probably out of a cow that you built, that you created, right? And so that calf, that's even your next selections, right? So you've put all these selections in the process. That heifer calf, that heifer that just calved, is your most up-to-date, your most advanced genetics. So I firmly believe that keeping heifers out of heifers is one of the ways you can advance your genetic program the fastest. You can do embryos, you can do artificial breeding, all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, by selecting that heifer out of that heifer, you're selecting for those most advanced genetics that you've been picking out for. The third breed in that whole thing kind of presents some challenges. If you're thinking about this in your head, how do you do this? All right, I've created these F1 cows, and I've got a Angus and a Hereford or whatever, two breeds. That third breed is going to present some problems and challenges for you, particularly with a small cattle herd. All right, so I'm just telling you right here what is the most heterosis you can get. In reality, you can sacrifice a little bit on the heterosis to make it a little bit easier on yourself in the management of all these different breeds. Another thing is, if you're doing stockyard sales, black is king, right? You want to have black calves when you take them to market. And I mean, there's no argument that black calves per pound are going to bring more than the red calves or the smokes or whatever. And generally speaking, you'll have outliers from time to time, but generally speaking, those black calves are going to bring more. By doing these crossbreedings, that's going to make it a little bit challenging to be able to produce those black calves. I've got solutions for that as well, but just keep that in mind whenever you're going throughout your process. So I was talking about those F1s. That calf right there, which it's a steer, but that's actually an F1 steer. This red heifer back here, that is one of those heifers that's got 100% of that hybrid vigor, because she is out of an F1 cow and bred back to a different breed of bull. All right, so her mother was a Hereford Angus cross, and then that calf was sired by a shorthorn bull. All right, I've never owned a shorthorn bull, so how did I sire her? We'll talk about that in a second. And it's artificial breeding. All right, artificial breeding, embryo transfer, some of those kind of things. I have used artificial breeding. I've never used the embryo transfer, but there's some abundant opportunity for breeds and genetics if you're trying to develop a cow for your environment and your situation, your context. Artificial breeding can give you some powerful tools to bring bulls in that you can't afford to own. For $25 a straw and about $30 to $40 for the rest of the inputs, I can artificially breed a cow to a bull that maybe costs $500,000. Okay, I can't afford to own a $500,000 bull. I can't understand how anybody could, but I can purchase a $25 straw of semen. If you can't do the artificial breeding yourself, there's going to be additional costs with hiring someone. Okay, I'm not suggesting to do artificial breeding because it's some kind of flashy new technology. I'm suggesting it because it may have a place in your production system like it has had in mine. I have had breeding seasons where I did not use artificial breeding. Timing just wouldn't work. It was going to create a hardship, all those kind of things. So don't go with artificial breeding just trying to chase this nice new flashy technology. It's kind of akin to owning a lot of equipment, right? There's an overhead cost in doing this process, and your outcome is going to determine what the actual cost was. If you do artificial breeding on all your cows and you get 10% bred, that made each of those calves really, really expensive. Okay. But if you do artificial breeding and on all your cows and you get 70 or 80% bred, that cost is spread out over a lot more animals. So be very careful. The other thing is the sex semen. So that's something that I've been using recently, and I'll just point out that the sex semen allows even more ability to select and manage. So we'll talk about it more later, but I just want to point out what I'm doing with sex semen right now is I'm trying to produce as many steer calves as I possibly can. And I'm able to produce them in a small window so that I have a consolidated marketing package that I can take to the stockyards and sell. So if I can have, normally I've got 20 to 25, 30 cows in a breeding season. Well, I might have, bull calves born from the first day of the breeding season to the 60th day of the calving season. And so that first calf and that last calf are going to sell in two different batches. The one in the middle might be a third different batch. But if I can front load that calving season and get 10, 15 of those calves all born within a week to week and a half of each other, they're all bull calves. Likelihood is they're going to all sell together. It might be two groups, but I'm going to have a better chance of getting bigger groups of calves to sell together. And there is a market premium for getting more calves to sell together in a group. So that's what I'm using the sex semen for now. Another option for that third breed situation is to use composite breeds. The herd bull, the cleanup bull that I'm using right now is a South Pole. The way that the South Pole works is it's a 4-breed composite. So it is a Red Angus crossed with a Hereford, crossed with a Centipole, crossed with a Barzona. All right. So the South Pole Association has done all the work of creating that hybrid vigor in that animal that replicates from generation to generation. All right. So with that particular animal, I've got 4 breeds built in. With a Beefmaster, just as an example, that's a 3-way cross. You've got Hereford, Shorthorn, Brahman, Brangus, Simmental. You've got a 2-breed cross. So there are composite breeds that are available out there that you can throw in on your breeding, so that you don't have to go back and forth between all these different breeds to maintain the heterosis in your herd. The thing that you need to pay attention to is the overlap of your cow herd with the subsequent breeds of the composite. Okay? So if I take, for example, a Brangus or a Sim-Angus bull and I breed them back to commercial Angus cows, I'm not getting as much hybrid vigor because I'm breeding a partial Angus to an Angus. Okay? However, if I take a Brangus or a Sim-Angus, which is Simmental Angus or Brahman Angus, and I breed them to a Hereford or a Shorthorn or a Limousine or some other breed, then I'm gonna increase that heterosis, because those 2-way crosses are F1. They're F1s. Remember, going back to that F1, the F2, F3, whatever. But they've already got that heterosis built into them. Some considerations that you need to think about early on in your process of trying to build the cow that works for you. What's important? What are things that may be important? What mature cow size is important to you? Some people like big cows. I'm not a big fan of big cows. I'll tell you what my cows are in a few minutes. Are weaning weights important? Age at first calving. So that is something that I got myself into a little bit of a pickle on, as I was trying to select for. early on I was selecting for things that I really shouldn't have been selecting for. I was really kind of trying to chase fancy genetics and all this stuff. And what wound up happening is I was deciding I wanted this heifer in my rotation, and well, she wasn't quite big enough this time, so I'm gonna let her go to the fall calving group. And well, what I wound up with is I was calving heifers out a lot at 2.5 and 3 years old. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but just keep in mind and keep track of that as you go throughout your process. That again, fertility is probably, I think, the most important data that you need to pay attention to. And so pay attention to that age at first calving. If she's 3 years old by the time she calves the first time, you got 3 years of carrying that animal before she ever gives you any return at all. All right, so you got to keep that in mind. How important is cow color? How important is calf color? Your calving season and your marketing season. We've had some discussions today about the calving seasons and when you should calve. I think that probably what you should start with is when your marketing season should be. Thinking about profitability, is when your marketing season is. All right. If you've got a very open and flexible marketing season, then you can look back and think about what's the most important time for calving. But again, you got to pay attention to those things. And then record keeping. You can keep a lot of records. There's a lot of recommendations for things you should keep records of. Hoof angle and hair coat scores and docility and weaning weights and yearling weights and I don't know. There's 15,000 different things you can keep records of. But what is important and what are you going to use? Those are the important records to keep. Sometimes you'll have mix-ups. You'll have mess-ups. All right. Docility for me has been a non-negotiable. If a heifer had a bad temperament, she was gone. All right. I never had to get cattle up to analyze them for docility, because anytime I got cattle up, I was always analyzing for docility. She caused a problem at any time, that was it. She was gone. Maybe not right at that moment, but she didn't leave the lot. She stayed there at the barn until she left. This bottle calf here, for whatever reason, you'll just have ones that don't follow the rules, I guess. Her mama, when that calf was born, she just lost her mind. She didn't want the calf. She tried to kill the calf. She tried to run me over. Never offered the first problem a day in her life. All right. So you'll have ones that they don't follow the rules. They didn't read the textbook, and so you'll have that happen as well. I got these pictures in backwards order. Can you show both pictures at the same? Yeah, that's perfect. All right. So this cow right here that's in the center, cow number 50. She is the dam of the heifer that's in the other picture, so you can see the family resemblance. And what I wanted to show there is that this heifer that's in this picture was sired by a red bull, okay? So she's got all kinds of color genetics in her, but hardly none of them are black, right? This cow, I bought her as a feeder calf. I have no idea what her background is. I can make some assumptions, but I can't guarantee. So what I'm showing you here is that you can produce black calves with colored cattle. All right. This heifer here, well, how come she didn't have a black calf? Well, she didn't have a black calf because she's a heifer that has good genetics in her. So I bred her back to a bull that I'm trying to use for maternal traits, and I got a heifer calf out of her. So that heifer calf that's on the ground there is my most updated, my newest advanced genetics that I've got on the farm. All right, she's got all the selection pressure that I've been putting on these cattle are in that calf right there. All right, so that's 3 generations that you can see that came out of that cow number 50. So where are we at now? I've got cows of all colors. I would say that cow color does not matter to me, but it actually does, and I really don't like black cows. There's a lot of reasons for that, but primarily the reason is, in my experience, black cows are less shade tolerant, and they are just not as good a grazers as what the red white and the black whites are. Black whites are the second least favorite. And I told you earlier, originally my favorite cow was a black white face, a black baldy, right? Well, I've transitioned and I've shifted because I've seen the performance. My mature cow is about 1,000 pounds. My current protocol is I'm giving every cow one exposure to artificial breeding, and I'm using sexed semen for bulls. And again, I mentioned I was using the sexed semen for bulls to try and create a market package that I can take to the stockyards. I'm trying to take advantage of that higher cattle market that we're seeing right now. My cleanup bull is a maternal South Pole bull, and I'm using him to try and produce replacement females. Any steers that I get out of that mating are able to go into my grass-finished beef operation. All right. So now, if you're really paying attention, you're thinking about it, you can see a problem with this situation. What I'm doing is I am inadvertently selecting for the least fertile cow. Okay. But I have a certain group of cows that I keep track of, and when they come into the chute to get bred, I don't put that bull sex semen in her. I've got a different canister that I pull out of that I'm using to create maternal out of those cows. All right. This is just a short-term situation, being flexible and being adaptive to the current market situation. All right. So I'm not retaining as many heifers right now as I normally do. I'm allowing the cows to produce calves that I can take to market. I'm trying to find the profitability in the market right now. So if I had to draw a front profile of an ideal cow, that would be it. And I actually took my ruler and measured from rib to rib in the picture. I didn't do it out in the field. I did it right here on the picture with my computer. But I measured from rib to rib, and I kind of imagined where her top line was and where her brisket was. And she's actually a little bit wider side to side than she is top to bottom. And I think that in Kentucky, with 50, 60 inches of rainfall, we have washy green grass for most of the year. You've got to have that kind of profile. Now, she is heavy bred. She was she calved about a month and a half after that picture. So, I mean, she wasn't heavy bred, but she was pretty long in her gestation. What you can't see in that picture is that she was artificially bred to sex semen, and she has a bull calf on the ground. Her and about 50% of the cattle in that group all had black bull calves within 2 weeks of each other. So I've got a good group of black bull calves I can take and sell to market. The other thing that's hard to see in the picture is you can see a few flies on her side. There's a few flies on this side. I zoomed in on my phone. I couldn't see any flies on this red cow back here. But even though she's black and I can only see, an eighth of her side, that cow, I could see more flies when I zoomed in on that cow than I could see on these two cows in combination. So the flies do prefer black hide, and I see it time and time again. The flies will be covered on the black cows, and the red cows will have very few. I don't do really any kind of fly treatments. This year I tried the garlic and cinnamon in their mineral. I think initially I saw some improvements, but throughout the course of the year I really can't say for sure that it made much of a difference. Coat color seems to make more of a difference in my experience. So moving on, what are some next steps? Something that I'm looking at trying is genetic testing. So there's opportunities, there's technology where you can take a DNA sample, whether it's hair, tissue, blood, semen. There's all kinds of different ways of sending in DNA samples. But you can send those DNA samples into these companies like Neogen. They call it an iGenity test. There's AgBoost. I'm sure that there are others. I haven't done a lot of research into this, but I've seen some seed stock producers that are using this technology. And the results that they're getting back gives them data about, they do the DNA sequencing and the chromosomes and the markers and all that stuff, shows them kind of a ranking of longevity, a ranking of milk production, a ranking of all different kinds of variables. So it's kind of like an enhanced EPD. If you're not familiar with EPDs, that's the expected progeny differences. This is kind of like an enhanced version of EPDs. So I'm looking at trying that to do some, taking samples on my heifers, sending those in, and seeing does that line up with what I'm seeing in the field? Anyway, just try it out, see what it's like. If anybody in here has experience with that, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And then again, selecting for weaning weights. So I don't think I've said it explicitly, but up to this point, the only data that I was worried about was whether or not that cow was bred. That's really the only data point that I have really been focused on, is whether or not she's bred. I don't care if she's polled. I don't care if she is black. I don't care if that calf is a steer. If she ain't bred, none of that matters, right? Because she's got to produce a calf for any of those background things to be a component. So looking forward, I'm thinking about selecting for weaning weights. I've got a pretty good fertility in place, and so now I'm looking at what kind of weaning weights can I get out of these animals. I'm not looking to try and produce the biggest calves in the world, but if I can select and get an extra 50 to 100 pounds, then I think that makes sense. Something else I forgot to mention is when I'm doing bull selections, and a lot of people when they're selling bulls, they look at you kind of funny when you ask this, but I ask how old the mother is. How old is her dam? Most people can't tell you, all right? That's one of the reasons I like the South Pole bull, is it seems like a lot of South Pole producers are thinking along that same route. I think there are other breeds that are just as good in grass production as a South Pole, but as a breed, the South Pole producer is more focused on longevity and production, all right? So it's very common for South Pole producers to know how old the mother is, how many calves she has produced, and to not give second chances. I think that's something that a lot of producers, seed stock producers, probably aren't as good about. Is that cow, she's got really good genetics, she's got top of this, top of that, whatever, and they just want to hang on to her whether or not she gets bred or not. And I think that's a mistake. We need to be selecting for longevity. Jim's going to talk about it later about some of the biggest costs in your operation. And he said that, I think he said 3.1 years, 3.1 calves is the average is the average calf production per cow. And I'm going back to look at my records and see, but I think I'm better than that. And I hope to be about 3 times that is what I really would like to be. But like Jim told me the other day, you remember the ones that gives you 10, 12, 13 calves. You forget about all those 3-year-olds that didn't breed back. So I think that's important. So I'm going back and I'm going to look at that as well. This is a little success story here. So this is another one of those calves that's out of that mating protocol. It's tough sometimes to get good pictures of cows, but what I'm amazed at is that she has the udder as a 2-year-old heifer. She has the udder of about a 6-year-old cow. I mean, just a phenomenal udder, and so I'm seeing the advantages of that hybrid vigor. Her mother doesn't have an udder like that. I don't know what kind of udder was on the bull's sire or the bull's dam, but anyway, so she's got a phenomenal udder. Things to keep in focus, things not to forget about. Docility and temperament, non-negotiable. All right, I think Jim said they got to have a good attitude when they come to work. That's absolutely right. Weaning weights do not matter if the cow is open. You've got to have bred cows for them to be profitable and productive. Try something new every year. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, you're expecting a different result. We all know what that means, right? Bulls are 50% of your genetics. Put some selection pressure on your bulls. Don't just take the first bull you find. Be willing to maybe travel a little bit to find a good quality bull. I don't buy yearling or 2-year-old bulls. When I buy bulls, they're coming off of a farm where they've been working for a couple of years. The last bull that I had, whenever I finally got rid of him, he was 10 years old. And my vet, when I had him tested, he said, "How old is this bull?" I said, he's 10 years old. And he said, "No, there's no way he's 10 years old." So I went back and looked at his registration papers, and sure enough, he was 10 years old. And he said, "Well, you better get rid of this thing. He's 2 years past when he should have been gone." That's what I want. I want bulls that are producing late into their life, because then they're going to have daughters. They're more likely to produce late into their life. Homozygous black bulls will produce black calves. All right? So you can build a cow that you like, and then you can have one animal, being your bull, that you don't really care a whole lot for, that's homozygous black, and you're going to have black calves out of that mating. All right? So if you've got to have those black calves for taking to the stockyards, you can get black calves on whatever kind of cow you want to produce. Okay? Believe it or not, red cull cows bring the same as black cull cows. Okay? The only person that cares what color cows are in your field are you and your neighbors, and I don't think your neighbors pay any of your bills. So have whatever kind of color cows fit and work in your environment. Test your bulls. Don't let your pregnancy testing show you that your bull wasn't doing its job. That's not being a very good job of selecting your profitable females if the bull's not doing his job. All right, the bull's got to do his job in order for you to be able to get the cows to do their job. And preg check your cows. I won't be able to stay with you this afternoon. I got to head out. I got to go help my brother. He's doing employee evaluations. That's what that right there is. Preg checking your cows. And keep records that you will use. Again, you can keep weaning weight, you can keep hoof angle, you can keep hair coat scores, all these kinds of things. But if you're not making selections based on those, then you're probably making extra work for no reason. Okay? Again, you can get black calves out of red cows. There's 2 lessons learned there. The goat learned that if it makes a loud enough noise, somebody will come save it. I learned to put my T-post in after I put up my net wire so that I can put it where a vertical stay is. But the point is, curiosity. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but we all got to do it. So.
Chris is going to change over the slides. We'll have lunch in just a minute, but any questions you have for Cody?
Curiosity was what did I add the shorthorns in for? I had seen some shorthorn cows that really piqued my interest, so I bought 10 straws of shorthorn semen and started trying that out on some of those F1 cows, those Hereford Angus crossed cows, and the calves out of that mating were phenomenal. So I tried it again, and I've done it. I guess now I've done it probably 3 different times. And they've had really, really good production. That udder on that heifer that I showed you, she was one of those that came out of that shorthorn mating. So she was a F1 on her mother was a F1, then bred back to a shorthorn, and so seeing that udder I think probably comes a lot from that shorthorn breeding. I think there was another question right here. Conception rates on the sex semen. So I'll have to give an asterisk that I'd no longer do preg testing to determine whether or not they conceived by AI. Early on, my protocol was I would do my artificial breeding. About 10 days later, I'd turn the bull in, and then about 18 to 20 days later, I would pull blood to do to determine my artificial conception rate, and then the bull would stay in for a longer period of time, and then I would preg check again, and I realized I'm doing all this extra work, and it really is not all that important. So all that to tell you, I've only got one group of the sex semen calves on the ground, and it looks like that was about a 50% conception rate. Typically, I see 70, 75% conception rates on my AI, so a little bit lower. Yeah, that was just one trial on about 30 cows, so not a lot of data there. Again, that's kind of a point of that I didn't really need that other preg test. That was just extra money, extra work. Whenever the calves come and they're born, I usually see a very clear defined, all right, these calves were born in this period of time, I had a little lull, and then I started having more calves again. So I can pick out those are the ones that were AI sired. So this year it worked out to be about 50%, but the ones in the spring I can't tell you. So you've seen with sex semen a little better conception on breeding heifers, and a little lower conception on cows. I didn't look at it that close, so I can't say for sure whether it was up or down on both groups or just one. So.
Will you be around at lunch? You're going to head right on.
I'll be here for lunch, and then I'll leave before the next presentation.
So let's give Cody a hand.